Pacifica Northwest goes through quite a metamorphosis throughout the course of Gravity Falls. Gravity Falls, as a whole, is divided into two types of characters. There are characters who are dynamic, who are fully realized human beings with clear hearts and passions and fears and dreads and anxieties and yearnings, characters we actually care about on a real human level. And then there are the stereotype characters, these simplistic, two-dimensional sketches that offset the more dynamic characters and form the atmosphere of the town. The second kind of character is not bad necessarily. There's nothing innately wrong with having these simplistic archetypes if they serve a purpose within the narrative, and especially if they're funny. Dickens gets a lot of work out of these kinds of characters. They are exaggerated to the point of not feeling particularly real or fully formed. They can be quite annoying and tedious. But there's nothing wrong with that, because they serve a role, they serve a purpose. They're an obstacle, or a help, or just a bit of comic relief. They offset the more interesting kinds of characters that the work is really focused on. Jane Austen also does a lot of work with these kinds of characters. There's nothing wrong with this type of storytelling. Gravity Falls has your solidly formed characters like Dipper and Mabel and Grunkle Stan, Wendy even. And then it has the characters who are just there to be a part of the weird town environment. Like, no one is going to complain that the guy who wanted to marry a woodpecker is not a fully formed character. That's just part of the fabric of the show. Or the two bumbling cops of the city. These are simplistic, exaggerated characters that simply exist to fill out the overall atmosphere and ambiance of the town. Pacifica is an interesting example because she starts off as, well, I think Mabel calls her a one-dimensional bleached blonde valley girl stereotype, which is true, and yet she evolves into a real human being. Part of this is genuine character growth on her part. The other part is just us getting to know more about her. She becomes a fully alive human being, and part of being a fully alive human being is being in the process of change and flux and transformation. We as human beings are inevitably tied to our environment, and that environment is always in the process of flux. Those great cliffs that seem so stable and firm are in reality constantly eroding, and they will look vastly different 1,000 or 10,000 years in the future. Nature is constantly undergoing this transformation. The trees grow, die, and fall, and other trees grow in their place. Even mountains themselves are gradually in the process of changing. There was a time when the Himalayas and the Rocky Mountains weren't there. Other kinds of mountain ranges, such as the Appalachians, have been eroded away. And of course, evolution is always at work. Certain species are outcompeting others for specific niches and surviving just a little bit better to pass down their genes. So this kind of change is always working in the world. I gave kind of a modern scientific valence on that, but the ancient philosophers in both ancient Greece and the likes of India and China have known this for thousands of years. So, this is a big reason why characters that are fully static and kind of stereotyped don't feel fully alive, because we know on a certain level that life is, to an extent, a process of constant change. Process of constantly reevaluating, receiving new information, having new experiences, and becoming just a little bit different as a result. That does not necessarily mean we're all like Zuko, where we transition from one extreme to the other, but it does mean that we're always kind of warping a little, changing a little based on our experiences. William James, the great American philosopher, talks about this quite eloquently. How what we think is common sense is not something that's static in reality, but rather a mountains worth of stock notions, some of which we get from our own experiences, some of which we just get from our social environment and milieu. And when we have new experiences, we inevitably try to minimize or rebuff them and kind of hold on to what seems like common sense to us, but inevitably, more so if we're smart and aware, but everyone to a certain extent has to change a little based on the new experiences that they have. It's a part of being human. It's a part of being a living being in this world. And Pacifica does change. She changes once life is breathed into her and she becomes a real person instead of just a caricature. We see that she starts rethinking things. The earliest example we get of this is in the Gulf War. I love that title. Where Pacifica, after this unexpected bonding experience with her arch rival Mabel, is kind of being driven home in the car, and it's informal, it's very casual, it's a bit gross, but there's something tender about it nonetheless, and Pacifica feels that, even if she doesn't have the words to describe it. She doesn't change immediately overnight, but she ultimately doesn't think the same way about Mabel and Dipper that she did before. I do wish we got to see more of how this change plays out gradually, but we do see it, and it's especially evident in Northwest Mansion Noir, where Pacifica grows to deeply care for Dipper, even have romantic feelings for him, and is thus hurt, genuinely hurt, when Dipper calls her out for being a hypocrite and just like her nefarious family, a charge that she desperately tries to refute and succeeds to a certain extent in refuting by the end of the episode. So part of Pacifica's growth is genuine growth. Part of it's just getting to see other sides of her. There is a wonderful part of Mamoru Hosoda's Bell that I quite love. I wouldn't necessarily call that his best film, but it is a very good film in how it emphasizes that no one is exactly as they appear to be. Everyone's putting on a pretense to an extent. Not intentionally, perhaps, but we're all a bit different than we perceive each other as being. That is a major point of emphasis in that film. And it's brought to a head in a way that is both charming and very funny when our protagonist, the shy, awkward, traumatized girl who creates this whole persona to escape being the shy, awkward, traumatized girl and becomes a successful pop star, she gets to know the popular girl she was always a bit envious of and always thought of as kind of haughty and condescending and mean. And she's not like that at all. She's actually very earthy and, in fact, as nerdy, if not nerdier and more awkward than the protagonist herself. And it's a surprise to the protagonist. And it's a surprise to us, the viewers. But what makes it smart, what makes it really clever, is that the movie never actually gave us any reason, any solid evidence that she was, in fact, this haughty, snobbish, popular girl caricature that the protagonist thought of her as. We just accepted that because the protagonist thinks that, and we see the film through her eyes. But then it's revealed that she was just completely wrong. She just formed this perception of her that turned out not to actually be grounded in real empirical evidence, and she makes a good friend. Gravity Falls is not that subversive. It's not that clever. Pacifica really is, from the first time we see her, a stereotype and a kind of a terrible person. It's not so much that that's not true as that's not the whole story, and that's not the full picture of who she is, and we see the influences that kind of made her that way. And she feels genuinely conflicted. It's the difference between viewing someone from afar and only understanding them as your antagonist, and then actually getting to know them and getting to understand why they act as they do. So, the character work here is solid. It's admirable. There's a deep sense of the unexpected. There's a deep sense, and the show keeps emphasizing this, that even smart people, bookish, intelligent people who love to investigate the world are often wrong about their perceptions of that world, and especially the people around them. This was true for Stan Ford, and it's true to a certain extent for Dipper. One of the great episodes of the show is Not What He Seems, about all the possible secrets Stan is hiding and everything he's been keeping from them. But that idea of not being who they seem is a recurrent one throughout Gravity Falls. Not simply in the sense that there's all these magical and weird creatures out there in the forests. Although, yes, that's true, and anyone who has spent a significant amount of time in the Pacific Northwest knows that Gravity Falls is only slightly exaggerating in that regard. But more importantly for the show are people who aren't what they seem. People who seem to just be rather simplistic, rather caricatured, but who are in reality possessed of these much greater depths. And Pacifica is probably the most evident example of such a deepening of a character. Mabel finds this out, and she is more willing to give Pacifica the benefit of the doubt. But that's Mabel. She is constantly kind-hearted, optimistic, naive to a fault. Dipper takes a bit longer to fully trust her, understandably so, but when he does, he finds that she's actually really cool and clever and interesting, and he might love her. There's a wonder to people not being what they seem. It can be a bit frightening, a bit unexpected, but a bit beautiful too. So thank you all for watching. If you liked what you saw today, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Donate to my Patreon if you can, and you want to see more videos like this before anyone else. Do come to the Pacific Northwest at some point. It's beautiful up here. Creatures can be a bit scary. Even little ones, like I got stung by a bee earlier today, but it's so lush up here. Really lovely. Anyway, tune in soon for our next analysis. We'll be coming soon. Thank you all again. Adios, comrades.